Hello, my name is Sarah Raskin. I'm from West Hartford, and I'm a neuropsychologist and a professor at Trinity College. Thank you very much for the opportunity to speak today. My work involves research to improve the lives of people with brain injury. I see every day the interplay of guns and mental illness, and I would like to submit testimony today in favor of greater safety regulations on gun ownership and use. Brain injury right now is the leading cause of death and disability for American youth, with 500,000 school-aged children sustaining brain injury each year. With appropriate treatment, these children become productive, happy members of society. However, less than 24,000 of these children receive treatment. So it's no surprise that when you look to the prisons, 83% of the people there had had a brain injury as a child. Our children are falling through the cracks, ending up with no help, killing themselves, or killing innocent people. Instead of treatment, we make it easy for them to access guns, and then we incarcerate them when they use them. And how are these brain injuries occurring? 20,000 people die every year from gunshot wounds to the brain. And unlike any other brain injury, only 5% of people who sustain a gunshot wound to the brain has any chance of survival. When a gun is in the home, it is 65% more likely to be used on a family member or friend than on a home invasion. Within the past 2 decades, violence-related deaths have, for the very first time, surpassed motor vehicle crashes as the leading cause of brain injury death. Firearm-related incidents now account for 40% of all brain injury-related deaths. 20,000 people die every year from gunshot wounds to the brain. What's caused this change? The data indicate that improved safety measures have led to decreased incidents of motor vehicle crashes. Gun advocates will argue that cars cause more injuries than guns. Well, this is changing. Why? Because we require a license to drive a car, a safety test, insurance, and registration. They must pass safety tests too, and the license and registration must be renewed. So let's require registration of handguns with an annual renewal. Let's require a permit or a license to purchase or carry a gun, require liability insurance, and require universal background checks on all guns. Let's enact a ban on the sale and possession of high-capacity ammunition magazines that hold more than 10 rounds. Sadly, I sat here today and heard people reduce this issue to one of dollars. Well, let me tell you, the gunshot wounds and deaths cost Americans $12 billion a year in court proceedings, insurance costs, and hospitalizations that are paid for by government programs. Gunfire deaths and injuries incur a societal cost of $32 for every gun. I want to close with the story of a young man, Jim, that I had the pleasure to work with over several years. He lived in a neighborhood where guns are prevalent. One night while taking a walk, a stray bullet hit him. The bullet was fired by someone who was just fooling around. When people say that they need more than 10 rounds because they might miss with a few, I want you each to ask yourselves where those other bullets go. This one left Jim paralyzed from the waist down and with a brain injury that affected his judgment and made him impulsive. He went through months of rehabilitation and slowly, painfully returned home. But people in wheelchairs are easily victimized and often the targets of violence, so he made the unfortunate decision that he needed a gun to protect himself. He hollowed out the seat cushion of his chair and made a space for it. I told him that guns are 6 times more likely to hurt a family member or friend than a stranger, but he was scared. We stayed in touch via telephone. One day his sister called. He and his wife had had a fight.
So just to bring us to the process, if you could summarize,
yes,
please.
He had shot her. Her life was over, as was his. One brief moment of poor judgment had changed everything. This would not have happened with any other weapon. We cannot continue to do nothing. We cannot sit back and wait for the next tragedy. I ask you to please make Connecticut a place where people like Jim and his wife can live safely. Thank you.
Thank you, Sarah. Questions or comments? Representative Bakayaki.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have a few questions, and I've tried really hard for 11 hours to listen very carefully, and I don't know if I understood exactly what she said. Are you indicating that the brain injuries that you outlined are due, and many times due to lawful gun ownership?
I don't know. I don't ask anything about the gun owners.
Could you tell me again what you said about there's this number of children who have brain injury and a percentage of them are from guns?
Yes, absolutely.
Could you repeat what you said because I didn't catch it?
The exact words?
No, just paraphrase it. It's fine.
The brain injury is the leading cause of death and disability for American youth. 500,000 school-age kids sustain a brain injury each year. Is that what you want to know?
And did you say how many or approximately how many you believe that report comes from guns?
So 20,000 people die every year from guns? Is that what you're asking for?
If that's, I'm asking you to, yeah. So 20,000 out of 500,000 per year.
Oh, no. Those are two completely different studies.
Okay. I guess I misunderstood what you're saying.
So ask me a question. I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
If there are 500,000 children with brain injuries every year in this country, do you have statistics as to how many of those brain injuries were caused by a gun?
Oh, how many of the children's brain injuries were?
Yes.
So I was discussing the children's brain injuries as a way to discuss that these people grow up to be people who are impulsive when they're using guns. I wasn't talking about the children getting brain injuries from guns. Children who get shot in the head with a gun die.
Okay. All right. And you were telling a story, and it was a compelling story, of a man in a wheelchair that felt he needed to have a gun for his personal safety. It sort of sounded like he was a client maybe of yours or of another professional. I wasn't sure. But how does the mandated reporting fit into the story that you told? Because I feel that's an area we need to look at. If that person had indicated that they were unstable, wouldn't you or someone else have been required to report that?
If he had indicated he was unstable, absolutely. If he had indicated in any way that he was going to be a threat to his girlfriend when he was seeing me, I absolutely would have been mandated. Well, we have a permissive law in Connecticut, but I would have had a duty to report.
Thank you.
Further questions? Sarah, I have one that you might be able to help me out because I'm clueless on this because I don't serve on public health, know that much about mental health, but I've had a number of conversations with other constituents besides the issue of gun control and school safety and mental health. The issue of pharmaceutical companies and I don't know what the correct terminology would be, oversaturation from doctors with some of the individuals with some of the prescriptions or medications that they're on. And that seems to be your expertise, so maybe you could help me with that because nobody's really talked. You know, again, we're more on the gun control side, and I don't know if the mental health component side has talked about it, but just educate me if you might be able to respond to that because I've heard some criticism, you know, from people saying the way the pharmaceutical companies work and the way they try to get their product into the medical doctors, and we know what we did here with ethics reform. You know, we can't even have a lobbyist buy us a cup of coffee or we'd be in violation of, I think there's enough laws with gun issues, there's 5,000 laws with us with that. And knowing that there's been criticism from that industry with taking medical people on trips all over the country or all over the world, I just would like to get your response to that issue.
So I'm a psychologist and I can't prescribe medications, so I may not be the best person to answer your question. Do you want my personal opinion?
Yes, because you know a lot more than I do.
I've seen things change drastically in the long time that I've been practicing, and I would say that it's moved very precipitously in the direction of pharmaceutical companies having a huge impact on how people are treated. I mean, I will say that that's true. I will say that when I was first in graduate school, it would have been unheard of for a doctor to take a cruise paid for by a pharmaceutical company, for not only a physician but a researcher to take a cruise, to go to a dinner, to be taken out. It would have been considered a conflict of interest. It's incredibly common today. In fact, pharmaceutical companies are doing the research today because we've defunded things like the National Institutes of Health. Government-funded research has been cut. So the only people doing the funding are the people who have an economic interest in the studies going in a particular direction. And I think whenever that happens, whenever your interest is in research going in one direction, there's a danger that your ethics might be compromised. But, you know, that's just my own personal observation.
Thank you. Senator Guglielmo, did you have a question?
Just very quickly. You know, I've heard this mentioned a lot about liability insurance, and I don't quite understand what the liability insurance issue is all about, because most people who have a homeowner's policy have liability insurance, and it would cover them for imprudent act with a firearm. So when the advocates say liability, do you know specifically what they're talking about? Because I'd say most of the people in this room have a homeowner's policy, either a tenant homeowners if they're a renter, condo insurance, or a regular homeowners. And the liability section of that already covers the issue, so I didn't quite understand.
To my understanding, then that's great. They're in great shape. But it's for the people who don't. We just want to make sure every single person has it.
I just wanted to, okay, thank you very much.
Further questions, comments, Representative?
Just to follow up, you said that Connecticut has a permissive law, but you have a duty to report? So you're not mandated?
It's not a mandate, it's a duty. To my understanding. I'm not an expert.
No, you're probably right.
But can I just take a second, because I've heard people talk about this a lot. I know that it would be great if things were easy, and if people fell into two dichotomous groups, and if the second somebody walked into your office, you could say, oh, this person has a severe mental illness, they ought to be reported. Oh, no, this person doesn't have a severe mental illness. Human beings exist on a continuum. It's muddy, it's murky. Confidentiality laws are there for extremely good reasons. Believe me, public safety would be much worse off if we got rid of confidentiality laws. And so while, you know, after the Tarasoff case, I don't think there's any psychologist around who doesn't take the duty to report extremely seriously, regardless of whether there's a mandate or not in the state. I don't think anybody looks at their state laws and says, oh, I'm not mandated, I'm not going to report, because that was a very important case in our ethical code. We get specific ethical training. We learn about limits of confidentiality. We take it very seriously.
Right, but when the duty to report does not then place someone on a list so that when they go to get a background check, it comes up. That's the issue. So if you do report, it doesn't go to an FBI base, so that if that person then does try to apply or purchase a weapon, they can. If they're on antipsychotics, if they have severe brain injury where they may not have breaks with reality.
But see, this is the problem. That this is where, again, I think you're trying to put people into two easy to define piles. Lots and lots and lots of people are on antipsychotics, living happy, healthy, wonderful lives, productive lives, families, children, jobs. So just because somebody's been prescribed an antipsychotic isn't a reason to then put them on some list that limits any other abilities that they might have. It's more complicated than that.
I mean just for gun ownership. Because if they're not on their medicine, they may not be having a happy, healthy life.
Listen, I'm happy to have more regulations. I think other people in the room might.
Right. Right.
I'm happy to have lots of checks and balances and be very, very careful about who owns a gun.
Right.
But I think you're just going to have to be really careful to say, just because somebody was once prescribed an antipsychotic may not be the way that you make the determination that they have severe mental illness. It may be the way that you make the determination that they not be allowed to own a gun. And that's a possibility. I know for things like getting a license to drive, it's very complicated. When somebody has a severe brain injury and I make the determination that they shouldn't be allowed to drive, it becomes a very big, complex, difficult issue because you're limiting their independence. Right. And so there's always that pushback.
Thank you.
Thank you. Further questions, comments? Thank you very much for your testimony.